The beginning of the city of Anchorage and the beginning of All Saints Episcopal Church are remarkably intertwined. Let's see how. Three unique events contribute to the birth of All Saints. A canoe trip by a Church of England missionary. B, the bankruptcy of a privately owned railroad. And C, the success of Cordova's Red Dragon. In 1861, a month after Southern troops bombarded Fort Sumter, South Carolina, Church of England missionary William Kirkby canoes west on the Porcupine River to Fort Yukon, a trading post run by the Hudson Bay Company. Kirkby's intense week of meetings with the Alaskan Gwich'in establishes an Anglican communion presence in the territory of Russian Alaska. He is the first to translate the New Testament into an Athabascan language. Archdeacon MacDonald, assisted by his Gwich'in wife Julia, takes over Kirkby's work and translates the entire Bible, the Book of Common Prayer, and the hymnal into Gwich'in. In 1867, the United States buys Alaska from Russian, and the Episcopal Church begins work in Anvik, Point Hope, and Tanana. In 1888, the House of Bishops designates Alaska a missionary jurisdiction. By 1894, the Episcopal Church has 3 missions in the new missionary district, but no bishop. Gold, copper, and coal are discovered throughout Alaska, triggering an influx of miners from every part of the globe. Optimistic Seattle businessmen financed the Alaska Central Railroad to run from the ice-free port of Seward to the interior town of Fairbanks. 74 miles of track are completed from Seward to Kern Creek, just south of Girdwood, before the privately owned railroad declares bankruptcy. Then World War I begins. The U.S. government is desperate for high-grade coal for its new Pacific Naval Fleet, and the Matanuska Valley has high-grade coal, but no way to deliver it to the Navy. The U.S. government buys the bankrupt railroad and chooses to move its headquarters from Seward to Ship Creek. The Episcopal Church reluctantly funds a bishop for Alaska. The Reverend Peter Trimble Rowe, serving in Michigan, is elected and consecrated, thanks to some maneuvering by financier J.P. Morgan. He arrives in interior Alaska in 1896 via the Chilkoot Trail, and he continues down the Yukon River to each mission. He repeats the journey in 1898 with 22,000 gold miners headed to the Klondike. Rowe hauls his own 450-pound sled and holds services for the men on the trail. He even builds a crude boat and is one of the first to successfully shoot the rapids after leaving Lake Bennett. When he arrives at Fort Yukon by boat, he finds some studying Kirkby's Gwich'in New Testament. A few elders remember Kirkby's visit in 1861. Further down the Yukon River, he visits Fort Adams near Tanana and conducts his very first confirmation. By August of 1896, Bishop Rowe arrives at Christ Church Mission Anvik and finally meets the Reverend John Chapman. At Anvik, 16 are confirmed. The original South Central Deanery is visited by Rowe in the winter of 1904 for the first time. He travels by dog sled from Fairbanks to Valdez, 400 perilous miles in minus 60-degree temperatures. He is welcomed by a lively group of Episcopalians in Valdez. In a few years, there is a resident priest in Valdez who serves 3 missions by boat. When construction begins on the Copper River and Northwestern Railway, a subsidiary of the Kennecott Corporation, hundreds of men arrive in Cordova. Bishop Rowe and the Reverend Edward P. Newton build a mission that can be used for church services on Sunday and a home-like refuge at other times. Painted bright red and dedicated to St. George, the mission is nicknamed the Red Dragon. It is open 7 days a week and has a reading room, a fireplace, a piano, and a pool table. On Sundays, an altar drops from the rafters and chairs are set up for church services. The Red Dragon is an alternative to the bars and brothels popular during the building of any railroad, and it makes the national news. Collier's Weekly. In 1913, Bishop Rowe gives his cordial assent to the Ascent of Denali by Archdeacon Hudson Stuck. Stuck and his team are the first to conquer the summit of the tallest peak in North America, but his trail assistant and interpreter, Alaska native Walter Harper, is the first to stand on the summit. All Saints member Don Harper is Walter's nephew. Bishop Rowe knows how hard it is to solicit funds from the domestic and foreign missionary society for any new mission church or missionary priest in Alaska, especially when the white population keeps taking off to follow the next gold strike. Maybe if the government-owned railroad headquartered at Ship Creek is built, a stable population is a sure bet. And in Ship Creek, he says, what is needed is another Red Dragon. President Woodrow Wilson creates the Alaska Engineering Commission, AEC, to build a railroad from Seward to Fairbanks. Lieutenant Frederick Mears, the Army engineer who just rerouted the Panama Railroad, is selected to manage the project from the headquarters at Ship Creek. Fortunately for Bishop Rowe, Mears is an Episcopalian. While stationed in Panama, Mears married Jenny or Jane Wainwright. Fort Wainwright in Fairbanks will be named for Jane's brother, General Jonathan Wainwright. Jonathan Wainwright is known for gallantly defending the Bataan Peninsula and Corregidor Island in the Philippines during the early months of World War II. Jane's great-grandfather is the Reverend Jonathan Wainwright, Episcopal Bishop of New York. The Mears are ardent Episcopalians, and they want an Episcopal church in their new town. Frederick Mears arrives in Ship Creek in May and finds himself not only building a railroad, but managing a city of tents. In April, the AEC constructs a log social hall and a log hospital below Government Hill. Bishop Rowe wastes no time in visiting Mears to discuss plans for an Episcopal church in the new town. A deep and long-lasting friendship develops, so much so that Bishop Rowe gives the sermon at Frederick Mears' funeral in 1939. The location and speedy construction of the Anchorage mission is crucial. Bishop Rowe finds generous funders on the East Coast, thanks to the popular article in Collier's Weekly on the Red Dragon, and sends the Reverend Edward Maloney from Valdez to the tent city for the July 9th auction of city lots. Maloney secures 2 lots in a location that will be immediately visible to all who enter the city by water or rail. On July 18th, the Episcopalians meet in the Log Social Hall, and Maloney conducts the very first Sunday school in Anchorage. The name of All Saints is chosen. The original South Century Deanery is growing. Maloney, missionary priest in charge, now conducts services in Valdez, Cordova, Seward, and Anchorage. He lives in Valdez and travels to each mission by water. When Maloney is blocked by ice or scheduled elsewhere, the Reverend T.P. Howard conducts services in the social hall and in the railroad camps nearby. Howard also manages the reading room, patterned after Cordova's Red Dragon, that is also held in the social hall. Jane Mears and daughters Betty and Joe arrive at Ship Creek by boat. They live in a tent until Alaska Railroad Cottage No. 6 is completed for them on Government Hill. The girls love the tent, but Jane, expecting her third child in December, is delighted to move into Cottage No. 6. She wastes no time in organizing the Anchorage Women's Club with All Saints women Florence Wendler and Della Kimball. The raison d'etre of the Anchorage Women's Club is to provide a school building for the town's 90 students, including Joe and Betty Mears, Myrtle and Clarice Wendler, and Decima Kimball. Schools in the territory of Alaska are usually funded by federal liquor licensing revenue, but Colonel Mears establishes Anchorage as a dry town. So Jane, on behalf of the Women's Club, approaches her husband and asks him to build a school. "I am busy building a railroad. If you want a school, Jane, you'll have to build it yourself," he replies. He does secure funding, though, through the Alaska Engineering Commission. Jane personally oversees the construction of the first school, which is finished in November, just in time for the birth of their son Frederick. Florence's husband, Tony Wendler, is the first clerk of the Anchorage School Board. Ora D. Clark is the first teacher and superintendent. Mears Middle School is named for Jane Mears, Wendler Middle School is named for Tony Wendler, and Clark Middle School is named for Ora D. Clark, and all attend Sunday services at the Episcopal Mission in the Log Social. Jane personally oversees the construction of this first school, which is finished in November, just in time for the birth of their son Frederick. Florence's husband, Tony Wendler, is the first clerk of the Anchorage School Board. Ora D. Clark is the first teacher and superintendent. Mears Middle School is named for Jane Mears. Wendler Middle School is named for Tony Wendler, and Clark Middle School is named for Ora D. Clark. All attend Sunday services at the Episcopal Mission in the Log Social Hall. At the 1916 Triennial Meeting in St. Louis, the last speaker on the docket is Bishop Rowe. He says Alaska is so large he hardly knows where to begin, but he will pitch in anyway. 6,000 people now live in Anchorage. Here we have lots and a guild of 32 women. A clergyman is badly needed, and I want that man tomorrow. In December, Bishop Rowe reports that the Reverend Edwin Wallace Hughes from Michigan is on his way to Anchorage to serve All Saints. Construction begins on the All Saints building on the northwest corner of K Street and 3rd Avenue. In 1916, Tony and Florence Wendler's grocery store is thriving on the southwest corner of 4th Avenue and I Street. Irving and Della Kimball's dry goods store is prospering on the corner of 5th Avenue and E Street. Construction of a larger school begins in the fall. High school is on the 3rd floor, and the lower grades are on the 1st and 2nd floors. In 1918, Decima Kimball, Andreessen Schlossen, and Myrtle Wendler Stallnaker are sitting at their desks in the new school. A larger home for Frederick and Jane Mears is constructed on the corner of H and Christensen. They move in after Christmas. With the only piano in Anchorage, their living room is a popular gathering place. The first service of All Saints Episcopal Church in the new building is May 6, 1917. At 11 a.m., 44 attend Holy Communion. The paten and chalice used in the first service is a gift to the Reverend Hughes by his former Sunday school class at St. Luke's, Kalamazoo, Michigan. The class uses their Lenten offering to purchase the communion set. When Hughes leaves in 1920, he presents the communion set to All Saints. The Ladies' Guild, mentioned by Bishop Rowe in St. Louis in 1916, is active with many members. Edith Longacre is the secretary and records the details of the plans for the first bazaar in 1917. 2 weeks after the Reverend Hughes' first service, the town celebrates Memorial Day with a parade down 4th Avenue. During the week, the Reverend Hughes hops the train to conduct services at different railroad camps. In January, Major Frederick Mears leaves Anchorage to build a railroad in France for the Allies. Anchorage bids farewell to the Mears as the family boards the train for Seward and then takes a ship to Seattle. But there is still a gap in the tracks between Anchorage and Seward, and the family must load all their luggage on to a bobsled to be carried between trains. Colonel Mears returns to Anchorage in 1919 to complete the railroad from Anchorage to Fairbanks. Because the railroad is complete between Seward and Anchorage, and they enjoy the train ride with no bobsled portage. In 1920, Miss Catherine DeWald arrives by ship to marry Anchorage lawyer William Rager. The Reverend E.W. Hughes waits in the church for his first wedding to begin. Meanwhile, Miss DeWald must wait until the tide comes in to disembark from the ship, and then she must climb the steep hill to join her fiancé. But she does know exactly where she is headed, because the church is indeed visible when you arrive by boat. The city of Anchorage incorporates, and the leaders meet in November of 1920. All Saints members A.C. Craig and John Longacre are councilmen. The railroad from Seward to Fairbanks is finally finished in 1922. The next year, President Warren G. Harding visits Alaska to commemorate the completion with a gold spike at Nenana. The Mears family leaves Alaska shortly after. As 2.5-year-old Bill Rager and his father walk their dog near the Anchorage depot, they are surprised by a passenger train arriving at an unusual time. Even more unusual are the men in fancy suits who step off the train. "Hello, Buster! Fine-looking dog," are the president's words to Bill Rager. His father stops by Denny Hewitt's shop on the way home to commemorate the occasion with a photograph. For years, the 1923 photo of Bill is displayed on the screen of the Empress Theater, 4th Avenue and G Street, as an advertisement for Hewitt's. Bill Rager, whose parents were the first couple married at All Saints in 1920, dies in 2005. He leaves a bequest to All Saints that makes possible heated sidewalks, heated steps, and other amenities. But heated steps and heated sidewalks don't exist in 1919. The steep slope of the 3rd and K location makes winter access hazardous. Bishop Rowe attends a guild meeting and convinces the ladies to help fund the move. The church building is moved to 5th Avenue and F Street in 1920. The Reverend Burdett Lansdowne is assigned to All Saints in 22. Accommodations are rented for his wife and 3 children. In addition to Anchorage, Lansdowne serves St. Peter's and Seward. 1922 is the 5-year anniversary of the same building in 2 locations. Episcopal missionary the Reverend William Archibald Thomas is assigned vicar of All Saints in 1925. He travels by train to Seward at least once a month to hold services at St. Peter's. The Reverend William McPherson moves into the new rectory in Seward and travels to Anchorage once a month to hold services. He is then assigned to All Saints in 1930 and he moves to Anchorage, but there is no rectory. The Reverend John Boyd Bentley is consecrated suffragan bishop of Alaska at the 1931 General Convention in Denver, Colorado. In 1934, Bishop Bentley consecrates All Saints Episcopal Mission in Anchorage. The Reverend Warren Richmond Fenn arrives in 1935, and 11 parishioners attend his first service at All Saints. The Anchorage Fire Hall is next door to the church at F and 5th. When the siren sounds, Father Fenn runs next door and puts the coffee pot on in the station, so the firefighters have fresh hot coffee when they return. When he leaves in 1950, the church has outgrown the building at F and 5th and has attained parish status. Some of the growth is due to the federal government's crash defense program. In 1939, President Roosevelt sets aside 50,000 acres adjacent to Anchorage for a military reservation. Under Father Fenn, there is a boy choir that sings at the 1935 confirmation service with Bishop Rowe. Frank Camara is a chorister in the boy choir. After spending World War II with his family in a Japanese internment camp, he returns to Anchorage. The family finds a way to buy back their former businesses, and Frank and George run Snow White Cleaners. Brother William Camara is an artist and will design and install the future stained glass windows at All Saints. The Reverend John Boyd Bentley is elected second bishop of the Missionary District of Alaska in 1942. In 1948, he is appointed director of the Overseas Department for the Episcopal Church and leaves Alaska for New York. In that position, he encourages seminarian Norman Elliott to serve as a missionary. The Japanese bomb Fort Mears, Dutch Harbor, in 1942. The military pours into Alaska, Anchorage grows, and All Saints grows. Dottie Gleason's parents, stationed in Anchorage, are married by Father Fenn. In 1997, All Saints supports Dottie as a missionary to the Honduras. In January of 1945, All Saints Mission becomes All Saints Parish. It is the first Episcopal church in Alaska to be self-supporting. All Saints no longer needs funds from the Missionary Society. It runs a successful kindergarten as well, thanks to Minnie and Kazoo, who are married to Bill and George Camara. May 15, 1948, the Reverend William Jones Gordon Jr. is consecrated third bishop of the Missionary District of Alaska. In 1949, the Reverend Albert J. Sayers becomes priest in charge of All Saints. Land is purchased for a new church building way out in the country on the corner of 8th Avenue and F Street, across the street from other parishioners who live out in the country, Ed and Bertha Meyer. The church is designed by John Bergamini, the architect for the Overseas Department of the Episcopal Church. Ground is broken in October of 1950, and the undercroft is completed. First, missionary Norman Elliott, recent graduate of Virginia Theological Seminary, arrives in Alaska thanks to former Alaska Bishop Bentley's encouragement. Norm's first assignment is deacon in charge of St. Mark's Nenana. The basement is finished just in time to hold the 1951 Christmas Eve service. Work on the attached rectory continues while the congregation meets in the undercroft. On February 17, 1952, Bishop Gordon ordains Norman Elliott to the priesthood in the finished undercroft of the half-finished All Saints Episcopal Church. The Reverend Albert J. Sayers, with wife Thelma and 2 sons, move into the finished rectory and wait for the completion of the church. The Reverend Norman Elliott fills in for vacationing Sayers in August and earns his pilot's license at Merrill Field. The name of his plane is the Drunken Canary. The consecration of the new building by Bishop Gordon is August 30th, 1953. The preacher is presiding bishop of the National Church, the Right Reverend Henry Knox Sherrill. On November 28, 1954, the first service of St. Mary's Episcopal Church is held in a garage in the Anchor Homes subdivision on the northern end of Lake Otis Street. An impressive confirmation with Bishop Gordon takes place in May before Father Sayers is appointed priest in charge of St. Andrews in Petersburg, Alaska. In February of 1956, the Constitution for the future state of Alaska is ratified. All Saints member Judge Seaborn Buckaloo Jr. is a delegate and signatory. Bishop Gordon installs the Reverend Malcolm Minor as rector of All Saints. Minor spearheads the opening of St. Bartholomew's in Palmer. In 1957, Father Elliott marries Miss Stella Burton, Bishop Gordon's secretary. Alaska is officially proclaimed a state on January 3, 1959, but everyone celebrates statehood on June 30, 1958.
Alaska celebrates the long-awaited grant of statehood with enthusiasm worthy of gold rush days. There isn't a dog sled in sight. Anchorage is a modern city, but Alaskans go all out to celebrate. All that remains is a plebiscite, and Alaska will officially become the nation's 49th state, and by far the largest, more than twice as big as Texas. They're already wondering where to put the new star. For the purposes of celebration, it's a glittering king-size star that dominates the field. The celebration in the streets lasted through the night. Elsewhere, they dyed the Chena River gold at Fairbanks, the old placer mining center. In Anchorage, a 50-ton bonfire blazed till the early morning hours. Once Russian America, then Stewart's Folly, now becoming the newest state in the Union, Alaska stands on the threshold of a dynamic new era.
The Reverend Lewis Hodgkins becomes the associate rector under Malcolm Minor. The Reverend Malcolm Minor resigns his position in 1962 and heads the United Way of Anchorage. Hodgkins remains until the new rector moves into the rectory. In May of 1962, the Vestry of All Saints calls the Reverend Norman H.V. Elliott. 12 years after his ordination, In the undercroft of All Saints, he is installed as rector by the Right Reverend William J. Gordon in the nave of All Saints. The Elliott family, Stella, Laura, and Pamela, moves from the rectory of St. John's, Ketchikan, to the much newer rectory in Anchorage. Laura is 4, Pam is 2, and Sydney is in the future. On Good Friday of 1964, a 9.2 earthquake shakes south central Alaska. Father Elliott is concluding the 12th station of the cross in the nave of the church, while Jewish women are in the basement preparing a Passover supper. As Father Elliott likes to quip, that was the first Jewish Episcopalian exodus. He recounts the event for millions in the film shown daily at the Alaska Experience Theater in Anchorage. Although the 10-year-old building shakes violently, it suffers no damage. 1966 completes the first 50 years of All Saints. The parish is in the hands of gifted priest, Father Elliott, and poised for meaningful growth into the 21st century.